Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 6th of March of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Middle East, but first we will discuss the statements that were made by the President of the United States, America, Donald Trump. This evening he stated that there will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. After that and the selection of a great and acceptable leader or leaders, we and many of our wonderful and very brave allies and partners will work tirelessly to bring Iran back from the brink of destruction, making it economically bigger, better and stronger than ever before. Iran will have a great future. Make Iran great again. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald Trump. So this is the statement that was made by the President of the United States of America. Somewhere at the same time, the Secretary of War, Pat Hexet, stated, Iran will beg for peace. Let us pick their new leader. So all these statements mean just one thing, that the United States of America is ready to begin the ground operation. You know that is ready to start the ground operation most likely is a wrong sentence about the situation in this area. It's better to say that the things that are currently happening on the territory of Iran are forcing the United States of America to start the ground operation, and probably completely unprepared for this ground operation. Today we received a very interesting map. If you remember, during the previous days we discussed that most likely the ground operation will take place probably in the northwestern parts of Iran, and most likely the Kurds formations and groups would be used for this offensive operation, and probably the state forces of Azerbaijan. And we discussed that this operation is not enough to, let's say, to finish tasks and to finish the goals of this limited combat operation. We discussed that the coalition first of all needs to unblock the Strait of Hormuz, but to do this, the only way to do this is to establish complete control over the Iranian side of the Strait of Hormuz. If it happens, of course, then we can say that the coalition managed to achieve its goals and so on. But we discussed, when talking about the northwestern part, everything is clear. We understand who is going to be involved in this operation, what kind of forces would do this and so on. But there were lots of questions how exactly the coalition is going to achieve its goals in the southern parts of Iran. And today we received this map where we can see how exactly this operation may look like. In addition to Kurds, there is another minority group in Iran that could be exploited by the United States to create a second land front and launch points for an insurrection to overthrow the Iranian political regime. These are the Baloch, one of the poorest peoples in the country. Economic conditions and discrimination have been vectors of insurrection in Iranian Balochistan, where guerrilla movements seeking independence for the region have emerged over decades. A US promise to grant them a greater autonomy in the new Iran or even independence could be enough for Baloch armed groups to launch a wave of attacks against the Iranian armed forces and foment insurrection. So according to this map, this group of Baloch is located in the southeastern parts of Iran, and we are talking about this territory. And as you can see, this territory is very close to the Strait of Hormuz, which means that most likely these units are going to be maybe used for this offensive operation. And furthermore, as you can see, this region of Iran is located very close to the Gulf of Oman and very close to main positions of the airstrike carrier group. I would like to remind you that when talking about this territory, there is another airstrike carrier group of the United States of America. Abraham Lincoln is located in this area. There are lots of destroyers, and most likely these destroyers and this air carrier will support these units on the ground to carry out offensive operation in the direction of the Strait of Hormuz, in the direction of the city by the name of Bandar Abbas, the main city in this area that is under control of the Iranian forces. And if these rebels are able to establish complete control over the territory, of course we can start talking that the Strait of Hormuz isn't blocked. But the problem is, of course, as usually, the timings, how many days, weeks or months it will take for these forces to take under complete control the Strait of Hormuz, because without control controlling over the city of Bandar Abbas, we cannot say that the Strait of Hormuz isn't blocked. So this is the main target from this side. But the question is, what is the purpose of the offensive in the northwestern part of Iran? Probably to be very close to the city of Tehran, because the distance between the northwestern part to the capital of Iran is very small, which means that this situation, the offensive operation in the northwestern part, can create additional pressure on the city of Tehran itself, and probably to force to create the situation, better conditions for riots and so on through the city. Now, the important thing is, of course, that probably when talking about the northwestern offensive operation, the main goal of this offensive operation is to create a corridor between Turkey and the state of Azerbaijan. So we are talking about these territories, because if it happens, of course, then the Azerbaijanis would be able to start supplying oil and gas from its state, from the territory of Azerbaijan, in the direction of Turkey, avoiding the territory that is partially or which is partially under the legislation or jurisdiction of the Russian Federation. I would like to remind you that the state of Armenia is a part of the Russian Economic Alliance. Also, we have Russian forces in this area, so that is why this creation of this corridor will allow the Turkey and Azerbaijan itself to create good conditions to start supplying and supporting with oil and gas not just Turkey but also the European Union, which will allow the European Union to reduce their independence on the Russian energy sources. So probably when talking about this northwestern possible ground operation, it seems that these two things are the main task of the situation: to increase the pressure on Tehran and to create a corridor between Azerbaijan and Iran. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, we continue receiving a lot of updates from the northwestern part of Iran. We received this video where we can see how the US forces were redeploying vehicles, mainly vehicles and equipment in the direction of the northern parts of Iraq, where the course formations are located, and we continue receiving a lot of updates from the state of Azerbaijan. For example, today Azerbaijan reported that Azerbaijan closes its airspace near Iran for 12 hours, which means that the ground operation may start within the next 12 hours or something like this. Furthermore, we received a report that traffic at the Azerbaijan-Iran state border has been temporarily suspended, according to the Azerbaijan state media. So now Russians are not able to continue supplying and supporting Azerbaijan using this road through the territory of Azerbaijan. And of course, we had this video where we can see how Azerbaijan was deploying military equipment to the border with Iran. So it seems that the ground operation is imminent, and we now see that at least 3 forces will be involved in the ground operation: the Kurds, the Azerbaijanis, and most likely the Maloch minority, which is located in the southeastern part of the state, which means that there are going to be 3 waves of attack. But of course, we understand that the Russians and the Chinese will not let's say watch the situation through the closed eyes. They will follow the situation, and today we got report, according to Western media, the Russians and the Chinese supply and support the Iranian state with intelligence information, and this is exactly who provide the information to the Iranians how to attack and where to attack in the through the area of the Persian Gulf and the Middle East. So according to Western media, all of those attacks that were carried out against the US bases, against the coalition bases on the territory of the Middle East, were controlled, coordinated by either the Russian intelligence service or the Chinese intelligence service, which is a very, very bad signal about the situation in this area, which means that the Russians and the Chinese are interested in the situation in this area, and they will do everything they can with the purpose not to allow the coalition to achieve its goals on the territory of this Middle East state. As of the previous 24 hours, both the coalitions and the Iranians continued attacking each other. We continue receiving updates from the states of the Persian Gulf. For example, probably the worst update is this one: the Arab Persian Gulf countries are on the brink of a famine. The United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Qatar imports 90% of their food. Saudi Arabia 70-80, and most of this import goes through sea, through the Persian Gulf Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, which means that we know that Dubai is a very big city with millions of people there, and if the situation with products continue worsening, then in 10 days we might see the biggest disaster ever since the beginning of probably even 20th century, since the, let's say, the period of the Second World War. So something like this might happen. Furthermore, we continue receiving reports that the price for oil is continue growing. The crude oil prices reach an all-time high of 92.5 US dollar per barrel. The sources reported that the Qatarians are not going to resume the production of LNG until the cessation of military actions, and nobody knows when this cessation is going to happen. So the crisis is brewing, and the crisis will lead to huge problems to the region itself. At the same time, both the Iranians and the coalitions continue bombing and attacking each other, destroying, dealing significant damage to each other, to objects of military infrastructure, to bunkers, and so on. A lot of videos were published both by pro-Iranian sources and by pro-coalition sources. In this video, we see the launches of missiles by the Iranian forces in the direction of the military assets of the coalition in the territory of the Middle East, and according to information we have, the Iranians began using new missiles in this, let's say, in this conflict. As for the US side and the coalition side, they haven't started using anything new. Everything they have used since the beginning of this conflict, the Americans and the Israelis and the coalition always uses during almost every single conflict that we've seen in the late 20th century and so on. So let's wait and see. More and more countries are being involved into the conflict. We continue receiving reports that the United Kingdom is sending more and more forces in the direction of the Middle East, special forces and so on. More and more things, more and more weapons and weapons and arms are heading towards this region. So now everybody is waiting for the ground operation, which most likely will start very, very soon, because the United States of America and the coalition is in a hurry. They can't wait forever. They need something on the ground, and they need to show more victories, because first of all, the Iranian conflict, this conflict is not about sources, is not about probably the future and leaders and so on. First of all, it's a media war. I'm trying to tell you that first of all, the President of the United States of America and the Republican Party need to win the midterm elections that are going to take place during the autumn of 2026. So first of all, to make this victory possible, the coalition and the United States of America needs to have a lot of media victories. So that's why the beginning of the ground operation could be used for these purposes, obviously. Now let's discuss the situation in Ukraine. During the previous 24 hours, we continue receiving lots of updates, and most of them concern the situation between Slovakia, Hungary, and Kiev, and about the situation along the line of combat contact. As for the relations between Hungary and Ukraine, we received reports that something big is going to happen between these states. Today, we received the report that Hungary blocked the cash flow from the territory of Hungary in the direction of Ukraine. We will break the Ukraine oil blockade by force. I would like to remind, according to Ukrainian statistics, up to 1 billion of euros came to Ukraine through the territory of Hungary, which a lot of money. Furthermore, we received a report that today the Hungarian authorities captured several trucks that were transferring money and gold from banks or from the territory of Ukraine to the banks of the territory of Hungary, and the Hungarians basically confiscated those money because they stated that those money were connected with different black schemes in Ukraine and so on. Furthermore, we continue receiving reports that the Prime Minister of Slovakia continues supporting Hungary and also threatens Ukraine with additional sanctions from their side as well. And both leaders and both these two countries are tasked just with one thing: to force Zelensky to unblock the Druzhba pipeline. But Zelensky rejects this idea. He's not going to do this. He said that, to be honest, I wouldn't restore it. That's my position. I said this to European leaders and to the leadership of the European Union because this is Russian oil. But today Zelensky made lots of statements and he began threatening the Prime Minister of Hungary, and today the European countries made also a lot of statements on this matter. They said that Zelensky is not allowed to make statements and to threaten the leaders of Europe. Furthermore, the opposition of Hungary, who is against Viktor Orban itself, stated that the European Union must cut any relations with Ukraine until Zelensky brings his excuses to the Prime Minister of Hungary. So we see that the situation between Ukraine and the European Union also worsened on the basis of the conflict between Hungary and Ukraine itself. At the same time, the Russians continue their pressure and offensive operation along the entire line of combat contact. But the most important thing that the Russians still haven't launched their major massive combined missile and drone attack through the entire territory of Ukraine. It seems that the Russians are waiting for something, or the Russians are moving their missiles in the direction of Iran with the purpose to support the state. Very difficult to understand what is happening. But at the same time, different sources stated that maybe this upcoming night the massive attack will take place. But meanwhile, the Russians launched another very powerful offensive operation, and this time the city of Sumy is the target of Russians. If you remember, during the previous video we discussed that different sources noted that the Russians are carrying out a very powerful reconnaissance operation in the Sumy region, and lots of sources were guessing what exactly the Russians were planning, and most likely today we received the answer to this question. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, the armed forces of the Russian Federation during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their position significantly in the Krasnopolye direction. So, for example, this is the situation by the end of the 6th of March. This is the situation by the end of the 5th of March. As you can see, the Russians answered these huge forests to the east of the city of Novodmitrievka. The Russians answered the forest, which means that the major battle for this territory has begun, and the Russians began advancing in the direction of the settlements of Mikhailovska and Ukhroidi. So the Russians are attacking and moving using broad frontline attack. The Russians moving further in the western direction. As of the end of the 6th of March, it's unknown the exact number of forces that the Russians involved into this operation, but obviously the Russians are using lots of forces if they manage to improve their positions so much, because once again this information first of all was provided and confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Liman direction. During the previous 24 hours the map has been adjusted. So this is the end of the 4th of March, this is the end of the 5th of March, and this is the end of the 6th of March. The Russians, according to information we have, managed to improve their position significantly in the Izum-Svyatogorsk direction. Yesterday the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that Russians captured the settlement of Yarova. Today we received the report that Russians captured the settlement of Sosnovo. And I would like to point your attention and to remind you a very important detail about the situation in this area. If you remember, just a day ago we discussed the situation in this direction, and we discussed that the Russians destroyed a dam in the area of the river of Oskol around the settlement by the name of Oskol. And we discussed this picture. Here we can see the consequences of Russian attack. As a result of attack, the dam was destroyed, and the most important that as a result of this attack, the main logistic road was also destroyed. And it seems that when the Russians destroyed the dam, they began their major offensive operation in this area, and just within the previous 2 days the Russians captured 2 settlements, which means that the destruction of this dam caused significant problems to the units of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area. So the dam is located in the area of the settlement of Oskol. The dam was destroyed. The video of the destruction of the dam was published on the 5th of March, and at the same day we received the report that the Russians captured Yarova, and today we received the report that the Russians captured Sosnovo. If the Ukrainians are not able to stabilize the situation with the logistic in this area without the dam, then most likely the Russians during the next days will continue offensive operation, and they will continue capturing more and more settlements in this area. Most likely The next target for Russians is the settlement of Svetogorsk, and most likely the Russians are going to keep advancing further in the western direction towards the village of Studionak. Of course, the settlement of Alexandrovka as well. So these are the next targets of the Russians, and we are talking about the territory in the forest of Svetogorsk. So this might be a very powerful foothold for Russians before moving further in the southern direction towards the settlement of Bogorodichne and towards the city of Slavyansk from the north. The Russians decided to attack, it seems, the city of Slavyansk from the north without taking under control the city of Izum, which is located already on the territory of Kharkiv region. So Russians will try to outflank the city of Slavyansk using these roads of attacks, and most likely we'll see lots of clashes in this area during the summer military campaign. So the battle for Slavyansk is imminent, and most likely the battle is going to start somewhere at the beginning of August or September of 2026. Before these days, the Russians will try to take everything around the city of Slavyansk, and with the battle for the city of Slavyansk, the Russians will enter their final phase of their special military operation and objectives they declared at the beginning of this conflict. As for the Konstantinovka direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything, but this direction is also a very important direction for Russians, because without taking Konstantinovka under complete control, it would be very difficult for Russians to continue offensive operation to the city of Slavyansk from the south, which means that we expect that in coming days the Russians will intensify their offensive operation from this area, and the main task for Russians is to maintain the line along this red line between the settlements of Markova and Sofievka. So we're talking about the city of Konstantinovka, Alexeyevka, Drushkovka, because the Russians are needed to get as close as possible to the Slavyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration from the south as well, with the purpose to tighten the news and to establish physical control over the main supply and logistic lines. As for the Grishina direction and Dobropolye, the Russians during the previous 24 hours improved their positions. These are the changes on the ground between the dates. The pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed that the Russians continue infiltration process and that the Russians are about to break through Ukraine's defense in this area and to outflank the settlement of Dobropolye from the southwest. Most likely during the upcoming weekends, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm Russian control over the territory, which could be a very big signal, bad signal for the Ukrainian armed forces. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special. Just several sources and mappers confirmed additional progress on the ground, but nothing special and nothing new. At the same time, pro-Ukrainian sources continue confirming that the Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operation in the northern Zaporozhye flank, and during the previous 24 hours the Ukrainians improved their positions around the village of Danilovka. So this is the situation by the end of the 6th of March of 2026, and one thing is clear, that in coming days the situation will worsen significantly. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.